All right. So, well, thank you very much for joining us for this third members webinar. Today we will discuss the title is Aging Well at Home, and we thought it would be good to have an opportunity to talk about the way Housing Europe members have worked with their older residents, especially in times of COVID crisis and lockdown, but also looking at the repercussions that this will have on the future of their work. We will start with a short introduction from Abdu, who will basically just guide us through the main tactical aspects that we should all know. So Abdu, if you want to just shortly introduce.
Yes. Yeah, thank you. So as usual, so before we get started, let's review some quick housekeeping items. If you are joining us via computer audio, we do recommend you to wear a headset for a best quality sound. You will have the ability to submit your questions utilizing the chat option in the panel only if you are shy. This time, all attendees have the panelist status. This means that you will have the chance to ask directly your question or to share a comment during the reaction time we dedicated for this. All you have to do is to switch on your microphone and camera if you wish to do so. As a follow-up, you will receive the report together with the recording and the PowerPoint. As for the agenda, so we will start with an introduction of Sorka Edwards, and then we have our three members, so Donald, Robin, and David Orr. So now, without any further ado, I give the floor to Soraka for the introduction.
Oh, yeah, thanks a lot, Abdu. So as you can see, that's the agenda as we had settled it before, but then David has to rush a little bit, so we've just switched that around. And so, yeah, thanks a lot for joining. These webinars have been really useful for us because of the stay-at-home issue that we've been dealing with during this pandemic. Housing is very much in the spotlight. You see at national level, but also here at EU level. So it's, I hope, also useful for you to get a bit of an exchange, but also very important for us to get that feedback from the ground. So obviously the spotlight during these times has been on inadequate housing conditions, such as overcrowding, of obviously homelessness, but also on the impact on fragile groups, and among those, obviously, elderly, which is what we want to focus on today. So they may not have the same issues as those suffering from homelessness or overcrowded. However, other issues, mental health has been affected, the impact of isolation, and obviously of loneliness. So this obviously is not a new issue for the sector. It's always been one of the raison d'etre, one of the central core missions actually of a lot of the social, public and cooperative housing providers. And in the past years, there's also been a lot of focus as housing has been as the center of the new healthcare model. So we've also seen this very much coming through the fore. So housing as a hub for a centralization of care to allow people to age better at home. So these discussions that we've been having for some time have been resurfacing to an even stronger degree, and we expect that also to continue as with the increased focus on health at European level as well. So this will have repercussions on the policy level when we talk about the social pillar, the right to housing, but also on the financing level that Julien will just talk quickly about at the end of the seminar. Okay, thanks a lot. Alicia, I hand it over to you to just introduce the speakers. Thanks a lot.
Okay, so thank you very much, Sorka, for the short introduction. I think we can go directly to the first speaker. As was mentioned before, there has been a slight change in the program, so we will have first an introduction by David Orr. You probably all remember David as a former chief executive of the National Housing Federation in England and also former president of Housing Europe. David is now still very active in the housing field, involved in a number of initiatives, including the Housing 2030 that Housing Europe has launched together with UNEC, but also more relevant to our discussion today, He's been appointed Associate Director for Homes at the Center for Aging Better. And he's going to tell us more about this initiative. David, the floor is yours, please.
Alice, thank you very much. And thanks to everyone for inviting me to come along and speak this afternoon. Indeed, I am meant to be retired, but I'm not doing a very good job at that, and have been involved and still am involved in a whole range of different and exciting initiatives. I will talk in a moment about the Centre for Aging Better, but I also want to say that one of the things I'm doing is that I chair the Housing Association Board of the Clarion Housing Group, which is the biggest housing association in Britain. And Clarion has a particular programme which it's developing about aging well, about ensuring that older people who live in Clarion homes are able to receive the services that they need. The Centre for Aging Better is an organisation that was established about 5 years ago with a significant endowment from the Big Lottery Fund and support from elsewhere. The fact that the money is an endowment means that it has a good degree of financial certainty and financial independence from now until 2030. And it has a very, very straightforward mission, and that is that older people should enjoy fulfilling lives, and that there are a number of things which inhibit the ability of older people to do that. Aging Better has a kind of particular focus on 4 key areas. One is ensuring that there is fulfilling work for older people who want to work. And of course, the important thing there is fulfilling work, not just any old jobs. Many people feel trapped in jobs that they don't like and are having to work in them for much longer. And actually, the economic consequences of COVID are likely to mean that the opportunities for fulfilling work for older people will diminish and are likely to diminish quite sharply. Secondly, there is a priority about healthy aging and how we ensure that people can have longer lives healthy, not just with a range of medical conditions, but can stay healthy as they age. And indeed, I have learned a lot from doing this, and one of the things that Aging Better focuses on health, you should all listen out to this, is balance. One of the things that affects all of us, absolutely all of us, is that as we get older, is that we find it more difficult to maintain our balance. Start doing exercises now to make sure that you are able to stay balanced, because it will help you to be healthy as you become a bit older. That there is an area of work about connected communities and ensuring that the various parts of the work that we do connect to each other. And then the area that I've been particularly involved in and where I'm advising and providing strategic support is on housing. Very often when we talk about housing for older people, the assumption is that we're talking about specialist retirement housing, sheltered housing, nursing homes, care homes, extra care retirement villages, all of those things. And all of these are important, and all of them have a very important role to play. And indeed, facilities like extra care retirement villages, we need more of. But the overwhelming majority of older people will never live in any of those environments. They will live in their own homes in the community, rented, owner-occupied. They will live in their own homes in the community. And one of our challenges is to ensure that our housing stock is able to cope with the demands of an aging population. Because we won't, most of us, move into specialist accommodation. We need to have homes that are safe and secure for all of us at all parts of our lives, and particularly as we age. And we know, for example, that in Britain we have a measure, a government measure called Decent Homes, the Decent Homes Standard. We know that 4.5 million homes in England currently do not meet the Decent Homes Standard. And we know that a larger proportion of older people live in these non-decent homes. And that the older you get, the more likely you are to live in a home that does not meet that standard. So people over 75, and particularly people over 85, have a much higher probability of living in homes that have trip hazards or are not safe and secure. And that we need to do something about that. And I think all of this has been thrown into much, much sharper focus by the pandemic, by the experience that people have had of living in their homes, where their homes have become the place not just where they eat and sleep, but the place where you do absolutely everything. We have known for a long time that actually many people at different ages, different parts of our communities feel very isolated. But it is much more likely that older people have felt isolated in their homes. And if you are shielding, if you can't go out at all, that sense of isolation is likely to have been very, very substantially made worse. You feel disconnected and separated. And we've discovered, I think, that there are some very basic, simple things that help people to live better as they are aging, and that the COVID pandemic has given a window onto. One of the most critical has been whether or not you are digitally connected, whether your home is digitally connected, and whether you yourself have the means, the equipment and the knowledge and expertise to use the digital mechanisms that we have now for keeping in touch with each other. In the UK, and I think in other countries too, we have talked a lot about social distancing. I think this is a profoundly misguided way to describe what we're doing. Actually, what we've been doing is all of us have been invited to be physically distant, to remain physically separate, while at the same time, we have been working very, very hard indeed to retain social connections. We have 4 small grandchildren. We have actually seen them in the last couple of weeks, but for 13 weeks, we were not able to see them at all. We remain socially connected to them and to their families by means of WhatsApp and Zoom and all the other digital mechanisms that we have. People who are already isolated and do not have that ability have been doubly disadvantaged. And this is, I think, one of the key things that we have to learn, that new homes should be built anywhere where they are as easy to connect digitally as they are to connect to the electricity supply and the power supply. We should not be building homes that are not digitally connected. I think there are a number of other things that we have learned. The first, which has been very striking from my involvement with Clarion, is that organization instigated a program very, very rapidly of contacting everyone who they knew to be over 70. And indeed other people who they believed were vulnerable and isolated. And that has been enormously helpful. Everyone, without exception, everyone appreciated the call. Many people said, we don't need you to call us back, we're fine, but thank you very much for getting in touch. But many others said, yes, we do need help, we do need some assistance. And this is something that we will continue to do. It was not part of the normal process of the way that we were providing our service. But some people who were isolated before COVID, because we've all had to think differently, have become less isolated and more connected. And that is something that we absolutely have to build on. And the other thing which I think has been quite striking and has been of particular interest to people as they age is that there has been a resurgence in what you might just call being good neighbours. I don't know how many street-based WhatsApp groups there were 5 months ago, but I do know that hundreds, thousands of street-based groups, digital groups of that kind, have been created, and that more and more people now know their neighbours better than they ever did before. They know the people who are isolated. They have made a much bigger effort to stop by and speak to people over the fence, over the hedge, through the door. And all of that, I think, has kind of revitalated our sense of neighbourhood connectivity, and that we need also to be able to build on that. Some of the long-term consequences, we really need to think pretty fundamentally about the new homes that we build, and indeed the homes that we already have. All of us, I think, have had to develop a new relationship with our homes because we spend so much more time in them. Far more of us will be working, if not permanently, certainly to a significant extent, from our homes. Our homes have been the places where we've learned, where we've played, where we've educated ourselves, as well as the things that we used to do there. And we know that to do these things, we need space. We've just had a government announcement in England about extending the permitted development of office accommodation to become housing and bypassing the bulk of the planning process. So far, this has been appalling in terms of the calibre of new accommodation it's created, and particularly in cutting down the size of new homes. We are seeing alleged studio apartments for one person, which are 13.5 square metres. Studio apartments for 2 people that are 15 square metres. This is absolutely disgraceful and not sustainable, and is not something that should be extended. We know that people need space at home. We also need that as people age, the thing that they are most likely to do to their homes to improve their quality of life is to add light. People need light in their homes. So we spend a lot of time thinking about some of the physical characteristics of our homes. But as we move to learning from the pandemic and what we can do in the future that makes people's lives better and that ensures that people can age well in the community, these are the things that we have to be thinking about. We have to be thinking about space, about light, about connectivity, about neighbourhood connection and connection with the people who live around you, social and digital connection, and using the tools that we have at our disposal to be able to improve and increase people's sense of being still engaged. We are, as humans, we are social beings, and we need to be connected to other people. COVID-19, I think, has given us an opportunity to shine a very clear light on how badly we were getting that wrong for far too many people, particularly older people. And we have learned, I think, that there is the opportunity to turn that around, to do something positive, and to learn those lessons and help people to live fulfilling lives as they become older. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. It was a very interesting and inspiring speech. As David will have to leave before the end of our webinar, I would propose that if there are specific questions or comments that you would like to raise and ask David in particular, we can do that now. Take a few questions for anybody who might want more details. Maybe if not yet, I can start. I had a question that I specifically wanted to ask David about a campaign, the Housing Made for Everyone or Home campaign that the center is running together with a number of housing providers across England that has been signed as well by the NHF. Can you tell us a bit more about what this is about?
Yes, Alicia, I can. This is a coalition of organisations that want to ensure that new homes are built to much better accessibility and adaptability standards. Something like 7% of new homes built in England meet full accessibility standards. And we have some of the volume developers saying, we do not think that we need to build any more homes. They say, frankly, ludicrous things like, oh, we've done a local needs assessment and we don't see any need for a greater number of accessible homes in this locality. And I think, okay, so the homes that you build now are, if all goes well, are homes that people will live in, not just for the next 5 or 10 years, but for 50 years, 100 years, maybe longer. We still have many homes in the economy here which are 200 years old. If you are building a resource that is to meet the needs of different households and different people at different ages, then you need to ensure that these homes are equipped for the changing circumstances in people's lives. And building to accessibility standards is one of the most obvious ways that you can do that. It does add a little more space to what you need, but it creates a home that is then not just better for people who need to use wheelchairs or who have mobility challenges. It makes a home which is easier for a young family with 2 small children using a double buggy to get in and out. I have never come across a house built to accessibility standards which has been, because of that, less accessible to anyone. It is something that if we did in all of our homes, every single person in the country, in our communities, would benefit from. So at the heart of the Home Coalition is a concerted attempt to try to persuade government that they should mandate that new homes are built to accessibility standards. And you're right, Alicia, we have some of the very biggest players in housing. We have the National Housing Federation, the Chartered Institute of Housing, REBA, the architects organisations, Age UK, a wide range of different organisations. The people that we don't yet have are the Home Builders Federation, the people who represent the private developers. The goal has to be to get them on side too.
Thank you very much, David, for this explanation. And indeed, I think it's a very key aspect. At least trying to have stronger accessibility standards for the new build. I was reading across some studies. The estimates are that where we are today is that about 70 to 80% of the homes in Europe are not to be considered accessible or adapted to the need of an aging population. And keeping in mind that new construction is only about 1% of the overall stock each year in terms of turnover. So I think if at least we cannot at least work on the new build, we're definitely not going to go very far at the pace that is so much needed. Keeping in mind that at the same time also renovation of the existing stock is also key. But once again, I would like to ask whether there are questions and comments for David. You can use the chat if you want, and then we'll give you the floor. Okay, but if not, I would like to thank David very much for joining the webinar. I hope you can stay a little bit longer, but I would like now to give the floor to the next speaker from our membership. We have Donald here. Donald McManus is the CEO of the Irish Council for Social Housing, the federation that represents the voluntary housing sector in Ireland. And the sector has always been very active in providing housing and support services to elderly people, including and especially during the lockdown. So Donald, if you want to share your experience with us, the floor is yours. Donald, you're still muted.
Okay, hear me now? Thanks for the chance to exchange information for members. Just to say in terms of what I'm going to talk about is basically looking at the impact of COVID-19 on our organisations and our members, how we dealt with it. Maybe look at long term, how fundamentally we need to relook at housing for older people. And then in terms of the European context, we have some proposals, suggestions at European level, which we think could feed into the whole transition of housing solutions. And by and large, we have around 10,000 homes for older people. So it's primarily rental housing for support or sheltered housing, and also for group housing that older people don't need quite a lot of support. So it's spread around the country. It lends itself to social isolation because a lot of the schemes are in rural areas. We're not in urban settlements. So from that point of view, the rates of COVID-19 in our sector have been very low. The rates of deaths have been very low as well. And really, our sector and the government from around March 17th were heavily involved in various collaborative measures to preempt some of the issues we thought would arise with older people and homeless people as well. I think at local level, our municipalities led the coordination. Each local authority has a community response team which focused on all the vulnerable people in their area, both for older people and homeless people. Some of the housing associations, our members, would be involved in those fora, identifying who the vulnerable people were, what their needs were. Was it to do with contact, shopping, quite practical things as well, online communication systems for them. Some of our members have collaborated together to prevent social isolation, having helplines for people to call, elderly people to call and have a chat with people. I think one of the apparent differences between our sector and the residential care sector has been the volume of COVID-19 and deaths. It's been quite apparent. They've been quite different. I think for the residential care sector, I think there's a fundamental issue that's going to have to be looked at in terms of the congregation of people in settings. And I know at both European level and national level, Ireland would be interested in to look more closely at that. I think there have been challenges in dealing with COVID-19 for older people. Some have been quite practical. Access to broadband, for instance, in a rural country, broadband has been quite patchy. In some parts of the country, there's issues between getting access to PPE, public protective equipment. That's been quite patchy as well. Also, there have been sort of housing management challenges, quite practical challenges for people who were cocooning, even older people. There's been a sort of a counter to want to socially isolate in some schemes. We've seen a situation where older people want to congregate, get together, which has been a bit of a challenge for a number of housing associations. We've also had new protocols for allocations of properties. Throughout the lockdown, our housing association members, the government decided to open quite a number of the social housing sites throughout the lockdown around April time. So our members continued the process of allocation. Some were quite creative forms of allocations through online systems of using YouTube, FaceTime, so people could be assessed for housing need, and then putting measures to move people's belongings to property. So there's been challenges with that throughout the lockdown, and sort of that will continue. There was some fear by some older people not wanting to move in terms of the lockdown, but there was a fear for that. So our members were reassured them that was okay. I think one of the key issues was our concern for both older people and support staff. Our support staff, the government were designated them as essential workers. So all the essential workers dealing with older people in housing projects or housing schemes were able to go to work, support older people. There's been a very low instance of cross-infection between staff and tenants. As I say, very few tenants have been diagnosed with COVID-19 compared to nursing homes and residential care home settings. And obviously we put that down to one solution has been the physical layout of some of the housing projects has been different from the congregated nature and intense congregated nature of nursing homes and residential care. So that's been one aspect, but also there's been issues with deep cleaning. A lot of housing associations have spent a lot of resources in deep cleaning as well to make sure the public aspects are catered for. I think one of the issues we're finding now is the whole area of residential care settings. Some tenants moved to nursing homes, and there was a concern, and there's been a fundamental probably re-examination of the role of residential care settings now and in the future, what role they will play. At the moment, Ireland is very basically two strands of housing for older people. One is you stay at home as long as possible, care for family and friends, usually by women in that respect, or else moving to nursing home residential care. So our options in between have been quite limited, and obviously we have a new government. One of our calls to the new government is to have a better spread of options, for older people, and not, in a sense, forcing people into nursing care. We find there are quite a number of people in our sector who are older people who moved to nursing care that didn't need nursing care, and essentially they were overcared, and that's a concern. So obviously that's to do with the whole professionalisation of the care sector. So we think living locally, close to neighbours and friends, is a much better solution, and we'll continue to push that with our new government. Also, in terms of looking in the medium term, certainly in terms of the planning issues that were mentioned, each of our local authorities are planning authorities, and we feel now they're much more consideration having embedding housing options for older people at a local level, and certainly with local authorities, housing associations, even private developers are working together just at local level and initially to try and put in place accessible housing, not for older people, for people with disabilities and other households in the long term. So that has started a new conversation about accessibility. Okay, it's a physical aspect to it. We think of the planning system, having that discussion at local level will help. I think one of the things we're finding is, in terms of any organisations have a lot of assistive technology. Voice technology has become a dominant form of contact, and any associations have that. Even hands-free homes, that has been a big choice factor for new people want to move into supported housing for older people. Our population will increase by 1 million from 2016 to 2050. That's a massive increase. We have a very young population as a country, under 25, probably the highest younger population under 25 in the European Union. But now we have grown older population, and up to 2050 there will be an extra 1 million people over the age of 65. So that's a key demographic we've sight of now. So it's a good time now to plan housing options and care support options moving forward. Our issue in the past probably was we had a very high level of home ownership, and home ownership was essentially a welfare care element. So the more home ownership you had, government would have felt, well, you don't need to provide any supports for housing costs because you're a homeowner. So I think that's going to be a discussion. If our home ownership has been falling over the last 10 years after the last housing crisis, that has an impact for housing costs in medium term and long term. I think one of the innovative things we've had over the last 20 years was a project called Safe Home. A lot of Irish people had moved from Ireland in the 50s and 60s to the UK, to America and Australia. And housing associations partnered up with this program called Safe Home, where they can bring back older Irish immigrants back to Ireland and be housed in housing association projects. There was about 1,000 of those being repatriated, and that has worked quite well. What we have found in the last 2 months has been massive increase in inquiries from older people, particularly in the UK and America, concerned about how the COVID situation has been dealt with. And I think that will continue. The more older people want to move back now to Ireland and to be housed by housing associations. That's a big change. I think at the European level, okay, looking at the Commission reports, in terms of the whole demographic report for older people. I do think in terms of the pillar of social rights, the right to community living, some of our members would advocate that now. The right to community living could be a new dimension to the discussion at European level in the pillar of social rights. I think there's a potential now in terms of structural funds. In Ireland, there is going to be transition for residential care to other housing options, and we think structural funds could provide a mechanism to facilitate that. So as I say, like many other associations and federations and member states, we are dealing with COVID. Our numbers have been quite low compared to nursing homes. But I think the big challenge now is to try and reorientate the discussion away from residential and nursing care to more community living. And if there are tools like, you know, the right to community living at European level linked to structural funds, we think that can provide a new mechanism in terms of a new thinking in terms of housing for older people. So there are just a few of the experiences we've had. We do see a shift in terms of people's dialogue now. We've always had a very good interaction with older people in housing schemes. We have a lot of intergenerational schemes where you have older people being housed with families as well. So you have a lot of exchange of experiences between young people and older people. And like many other countries we've seen, there's a lot of social engagement between tenants in various housing schemes. So I think the fundamental issue about looking at the role of nursing care, which is a dominant form of provision in Ireland, will certainly be re-examined now in the light of the congregated nature and of COVID-19. So, like health, well-being, housing are all interlinked. If we look back at the history of social housing, when social housing was, in a sense, established to prevent disease like cholera and so forth, it's almost like a deja vu that there's more thinking now to look at what role social housing and even affordable housing can play for older people. So that's just a few thoughts, and certainly we think there's a new discussion to be had now, both at national level and European level, on the role of housing for older people that isn't primarily nursing care and dominated by residential care.
Thank you very much, Donald. It's indeed, I think, a big shift that we're all expecting, especially in the light of what happened during the COVID crisis, but not only, of course, looking at demographic trends and the fact that people in many cases can live healthy and relatively independent life at home for longer. This is a big change that will interest the whole sector. I think it's probably best to go to the next speaker now and keep questions and comments for the end of this session. So without further ado, I'll just give the floor to Robin, who is responsible for European Public Affairs at ADES. And ADES, as you know, is the Dutch Federation of Housing Corporations that manage proportionally the largest social housing sector in Europe, with about 1/3 of the overall stock in the Netherlands. So Robin, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And after that introduction, there's little I can still say about ADES. Thank you for that. Abdu, I think you would share my presentation, right? Or
yes.
Or should I do that myself? What is your preference?
I'm doing it now. I'm sharing your presentation. Can you see it? Not yet.
I just see my name at this point. So maybe you can move to the next slide.
Yes. Okay. Now, sorry.
Yes, okay. Thank you, Abdu. Well, thank you first for having me here to speak about housing the elderly people. I think this is really one of the most important things that we do as a social housing providers, and also one of our key tasks. And If I look at the Netherlands, I think like many European countries, we have an aging population. And in principle, we would like to have people to stay and remain at their home and live independently as long as possible, because that's the most pleasant thing to do. For that, our national government issued 4 guidelines to make that possible. First is the offering of domestic help. 2 is the offering of informal care. 3 is offering daytime activities and daycare. And 4 is the offering of tools such as e-health. Can I have a next slide?
Sorry, just 1 sec. I don't know why.
Okay. And I think one of the red lines in my presentation here today is that we as ADIS believe that we should move towards new ways of living. And with new ways of living, I mean small-scale community living for elderly people. We believed in that before the COVID crisis, and during the COVID crisis, our belief in this has been reinforced. Like many other countries, we had a lockdown. And for a lot of elderly people, this simply meant isolation and loneliness. Often they could not see their family and their loved ones. In the Netherlands, a lot of elderly people live independently, but they live physically connected to a nursing home, and they would share the same door with that nursing home. And that also means that when there are rules for the nursing homes that they cannot receive visitors, which was the case during the lockdown, also those people could not receive visitors. A bit of a sad anecdote, our Prime Minister, Mark Rutte, he initiated the lockdown measures, and in the end he wasn't able to visit his own dying mother because of these rules. So loneliness and isolation was really a big problem, and there was also a big debate in the Netherlands whether these measures were not too harsh on elderly people. Important solutions here were e-health from a distance, and of course video calling with family, but also again the idea of living in a community with other elderly people on a very small scale. And on that issue, I would like to give some examples from the Netherlands to see how we are doing this at the moment. Next slide, please. Yes. And here on this sheet, you see a quote in Dutch by the initiator, co-initiator from the elderly real estate Grotenhuis, basically says we're moving from day activities to day experiences. And elderly real estate Grotenhuis has been described as a paradise for people with dementia. And basically, this used to be a horse breeding company where you have several buildings where horses were being bred. And now this is all being turned into several small residential farms. Each of them houses a residential group of 5 to 8 residents, all with their own atmosphere in that building. The residents together share a homely environment, but all have their own separate room as well. And an employee is present at every farm in the evening and at night. And basically, the idea here is to offer the residents a day experience and offer as many happy moments as possible. First, this can be done in being positively, giving compliments and being nice to people. But the main philosophy is here to let people have control over their own life as much as possible. And I think that's the crucial point. And you also see that as a thread in the second example on the next sheet. Yep, this project is called Odense Thuis. And that's an initiative from family members, again, to realize small-scale residential community living for people with dementia. The residents and the families are in the lead. Again, keep control of your own life. They decide what the house looks like, how the household is run, and who provides the care. The initiative dates from 2017, and for a long time, they were still looking for a feasible location where to bring this to reality. And by the end of 2019, the board of Odense Thuis joined forces with a Dutch housing association called Woonzorg. And together they initiated a dwelling or a residential area in Amsterdam. And 2 more buildings will also be initiated into other parts of the Netherlands. So this is coming to reality very fast. Then I have another example on the next sheet. Yep. And the next example is located in a Dutch village called Oerle. I will not ask any of you to pronounce that because it's really Dutch. And it's a small village of 2,400 inhabitants. And due to some changes in the healthcare systems, the villagers in need of care, of intensive care, had to move elsewhere. And basically in that village, there was a working group called the Care in the Village Working Group who thought, okay, but that's unacceptable. So they took an initiative, and now this group of people can continue to live in Oerle, in the new care complex at Zorgcluster. And the Care in the Village Working Group submitted a proposal to the municipality for housing and care in their own village for the elderly and people with disabilities who need a lot of care. And the care cluster has now been realized, a new complex with 29 apartments, 9 ground level social rental homes for the elderly, 2 group homes for young adults with mental disabilities, and a group home for 7 elderly people with dementia. And that center includes a first-line health center with a GP and a physiotherapist located in the building, and the district nurses also have their office there. In order to realize all of this, the working group joined forces with Severinus, which is a care organization for people with mental disabilities, the elderly care organization Archipel, and a housing association simply called Thuis. And Thuis is the Dutch word for home. Interesting here is that the elderly people in this group really come from that village or close by to the village. And also interesting is that the social housing provider gives priority housing to family that takes care of the people in that nursing center. So they will be able to live in the proximity of their family that is taking care of them. So we believe that's very important, because then you have visitors on a daily basis and not, well, a few times a week. And the added value of that is basically proven every day. Abdu, next slide, please. So in conclusion, the main point that I'm trying to make today is that there is a wide need for different housing types, local, community-based, together with family, keeping control of your own life as much as home as possible. For that to succeed, we need e-health, and also we need to be able to experiment with this and see how that works in reality. That's the end of my speech. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robin. It was really very interesting to hear about these projects and the overall philosophy, basically, that you're pushing for in this area. I think now it's a good time to actually open the floor for questions and reactions. We already have one question coming from Sork, I think. It was mentioned that funding could be used for adapted housing, but what about, is there a need for a specific funding for skills and for upscaling the link between care and housing providers? If you can comment on that. And I think it's probably valid for the 2 speakers, because also, Robin, you mentioned quite a lot the need to have health and care provision in the same local community where the housing is based. So. Who wants to start? Donald, maybe? Or Donald, did you hear us?
I didn't hear the last part.
Yeah, so about basically the need, whether you think there's a need for upscaling, linking up care and housing provision, and whether there needs to be specific funding and maybe even EU funding dedicated to this.
Yeah, I just, from my own experience in Ireland, it's been quite patchy. You know, you have local measures. We have a lot of schemes like what Robin mentioned in the Netherlands, like small schemes. Most of our smaller projects are between 5 and 15 homes. They get some support from the health authorities, but it's quite localized. So we've called for is an overall integrated plan to make this mainstreamed, you know, throughout the country. I think one of the key issues we think is called home care packages. So tenants who live in some homes, instead of going to nursing care, residential care, they can get access to home care packages, okay, if they have certain types of needs. So it means that people can go into their homes and give them support instead of them leaving their homes, going to institutional settings. So I do see a new type of housing organisation evolving over time to more housing and care, not just housing or care. So I think that will happen. I think certainly at European level, I mentioned before, in terms of this whole debate about, you know, the use of residential homes and nursing homes and so forth, I think if there is a move to decongregate some high care nursing homes, and bear in mind throughout the European Union, a lot of the deaths have been in these settings. Okay, they are where a lot of the COVID cases, both for tenants, residents, and staff, are happening. So I think there will be a fundamental re-examination of the congregation of settings for older people, and I think at European level certainly links into those various elements of the social pillar of rights, both in Article 16 and 18, and I think that provides a mechanism for housing to get involved here. Like most of the debate now is very much about access to care, affordable care, but the care that housing organisations provide is kind of social care, informal care. Robin mentioned we're the same in Ireland. It's not about high level nursing care. So I think number one, the debate has to shift at European level, and in turn that can help influence issues like structural funds. Like structural funds has been used for people with disabilities and decongregation. And I think that's a mechanism that could be used for older people as well. It'll not be easy because nursing and residential care is embedded in the political system and the private system as well. But I think we as housing providers can provide those intermediate care and housing solutions that prevents older people prematurely going to nursing homes and residential homes.
Yeah, and if I can give a short answer to that, yeah, I can give a very simple answer. Absolutely. I mean, we have an aging society in many European countries, and that also puts a challenge on housing and care and the link of them together. In the Netherlands, we already have quite a large housing association called Woonzorg, who's basically specialized in combining those two together. But that's just one organization. So I think in general, yeah, of course, there's a need for upscaling in that issue. Absolutely.
Thank you very much for your comments. Is there any other comment or question to the speakers from the audience? I should remind you that you can use the chat or make yourself visible. If not, maybe I have another question or comment, which is about the role of technology, because I think it was mentioned very often in all the presentations today. Robin, you talked about e-health, also a big issue, the availability of just simply of broadband so that people could keep in touch through digitally. So do you think there's still a lot to do in this area, and do you see this something as where the European Union can play a role as well?
Yeah, I think that the COVID crisis really demonstrated how important this is. I mean, I have a young son myself and couldn't see my parents, and of course then you try to video call as much as possible. This is only for the social aspect, and for the health aspect you also need it for e-health. About the European Union, I mean, I think for part this is also about upskilling and making people familiar with the possibilities that exist.
I don't know if you also want to comment.
I got it. Like our issue, I agree with Robin, but I would say a lot of older people, surprisingly, we found have been quite adaptable and durable and able to adapt very quickly to the situation. Okay, there's been a whole spread of different, from Zoom to Teams to 8x8, a lot of options for them, but we've seen them being quite adaptable. I think the key aspect is connectivity, and some of our associations have worked together to provide helplines. So if they're socially isolated and their kids are living abroad, you might just want a phone call with somebody up the street. Some of our associations have done.
Did we lose?
When Donald speaks about connectability, then the connection gets lost. Touche.
Practice. So maybe while we wait for Donald to reconnect, hopefully, I can give the floor to Marco Corrati and his colleague from Reggio Emilia. I see them and they've asked me to comment. Can you unmute yourself? No?
No, they are unmuted actually, but we cannot hear you. Let's try again. No, we cannot hear you, sorry.
Sorry, my screen went down.
Maybe they,
can you unmute them from there? No, eh?
No, they're unmuted from here and also from their side, but it seems that the laptop they are using is muted somewhere. Are you using a laptop?
Can you hear me now?
No, we can hear you, Donald.
That's okay. Sorry about that there. My screen, I'm on my phone now. My screen went down.
No, perfect. We can hear you. I'm just trying with Marco now if we can hear him.
Okay.
Marco? Non so se hai il microfono su mute, anche sul computer, sulla tastiera. Ok, sentiamo.
We are muted.
Sì, bene. Ti sentiamo. Ok, ready? Ok, now we can hear you. No, now not anymore. I'm sorry.
Oh, no. I don't know why.
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, so maybe it's a technical problem that sometimes the line just jumps and it's impossible to hear. Okay, Margherita, I just want to present because
just for the quality, I don't know if for the others it's fine.
I'm afraid we cannot really hear you, unfortunately.
The office of social management. So during the lockdown period,
I'm sorry, the team from Acer, we cannot
us?
really hear you. The connection is really bad.
Maybe they can try to switch off the camera and then just use the microphone.
Okay, we switched off the camera. Yeah, we switched off the camera.
Okay.
Okay, so now you can hear us.
Yes.
Can you hear us? Okay, yes. Let's try again. Okay, so I want to, it's okay?
Yes.
It's okay? Yes, I hope so. So I would like to start talking a little bit about the COVID period of lockdown that we have here in Italy. Because as Acer, we decided to activate proximity services to our tenants. So we started some activities, especially in the neighborhood, in the district where our tenants live, because due to the COVID-19 emergency, we were not able to receive the tenants to our headquarters office. So we sent a camper van, a project that the name was Welfare on the Road. And the president of this camper van set up as a mobile office. The function were to provide assistance and support to people directly inside the public residential housing districts, trying to alleviate the sense of solitude and isolation, and supporting them in carrying out the daily activities. At the mobile station, it was possible to pay postal slips, book groceries and medicines at home for the afternoon, and receive official information material about COVID-19. And also we provide a telephone number that gave general information about the service and offer the possibility to book groceries and medicine for the next day. And another idea that we had, and I realized that many of other countries, European countries done, was we do some phone calls to our tenants, more than 400 phone calls. We decided to start with the people that aged from 50 to 80s, because we thought that they were more involved in this emergency situation. The goal of these calls were to have a pleasant chat with them, first of all, because the call were really informal. So we try to have a proper chat with them, and finding out their personal way to face the situation. So we investigate if how they feel, how they felt, and also if there were their family supporting them, and also in terms of emotion and solution. And we trying to bring them a psychological support and show them local solution in the area, like for example the camper van. And so after the call, we realized that the 65% of the older people we interviewed use WhatsApp to communicate. So they are also like technological updated in some ways. They also have cultural interested, and they want to keep their social life active, especially inside the neighborhood, because there are a lot of volunteer activities, especially for elder people. We have like gymnastica, the gym, like slow gym for them, and also activities. For example, if in some neighborhood we have certain places where they can go there and they can have also breakfast together, and then there are many. And also we realized that more than can you hear me good? Because I can hear the
Hear an echo.
Okay, so I'm in echo.
No, now
okay.
it's fine.
It's fine.
Okay, sorry. More than 80% of the elder people are satisfied of their houses and or of their condominium where they live. I remember that I was one of the colleagues that do the phone call, and I remember that a lot of people told me that they love their house, they don't want to leave the house, even if it's old, because they spend all their life inside the house, so they feel like the house is their own. I'm sorry, my English sometimes is not very good, but another thing that we realized after the phone calls is that they have less consumptions of energy inside their houses, because they don't want to waste. I think this is due of their the generation of the elder people. They used to earn energy and earn money, so they don't want to waste. And from the interviews, we assume that we need to improve the accessibility in more than 40% of the building, in spite of it's not always easy to do it because, yes, because of the structure of the houses. And right now, after the COVID emergency, we are organizing a lot of activities, especially with WISP, that is a sport
That's an association
of sports. We want to do, well, the focus of the program is is to improve the health condition of the people, not only the elder people. So we are organizing with them like sport activities and also nutrition education programs. And what else? Cos'altro? Sorry.
Educazione alimentare,
Sì.
movimento.
And also, yes, and also, okay, and also they want to teach them how to collect the rubbish in a good way, and also to get more sensibility against the environment. And more or less, yes, I think more or less it was the situation here. So thank you. I don't know if you have any questions or.
So thank you very much to our colleagues in Italy. Is there any question or further comments from attendees? I think one comment on this and other projects, it's very interesting to see how the crisis linked to COVID was also an opportunity in a way to as David said at the beginning, to make some older people feel less isolated eventually. And in your case, also to understand what kind of services were needed in the community by directly talking to residents and making them more involved. So I think it's a very good example of turning a bad situation into an opportunity. So thank you very much for that. I would like to open the floor again for comments or questions. One of the questions is whether this, but also other experiences that we heard about, was only a regional or local action, or whether there is an interest in replicating this kind of experience even at a national scale.
Well, I can answer that. Oh, sorry.
No, sorry, I don't know. The question was in general
Maybe
or to us?
Start with Achara and then we go back to Robin.
Okay. So we start, sorry. Because
Yes.
sometimes, sorry, the audio is going and, okay. They ask, cioè ci hanno chiesto se era a livello nazionale oppure sul locale. Oh, okay. So for this kind of program that we had, it was just local. It was just local. I think each city decided to do something different. But as we know,
it is our interpretation, our role. Like social housing provider, we think this is the way for the world, the people, of our role in the social housing sector. Not only manage building, but big activity, strong activity with the people, that the people living in our building.
okay.
Thank you very much. It's true that indeed it would be important to make these stories heard and replicated as much as possible at the national or even European level. And we find a lot of characteristics in common between the good ideas that our members put in place at the local level. There's I think we can see a common thinking linking to this idea of people being connected, being embedded in the local community. and so on. I would like to ask the same question Robin was about to answer, whether the examples that you mentioned are specifically local examples or they're part of a broader national strategy, maybe? Robin, back to you.
Yeah, sorry, I thought it was a question directed at everybody. And I think the strength of this project is the local community, but I think you can still replicate it in other regions. So we have the Odense House. You see that is really coming from the community, but now they joined forces with Woonzorg, which is a national social housing association with more locations, and they try to replicate it in other places as well. So I think you can do both. And I think it would also be good if we all share these experiences on Housing Europe Evolution Hub, Housing Evolution Hub, so we can also replicate them amongst ourselves.
Indeed, thank you very much for that comment, Robin. And indeed, I should also mention from our side that we've launched a call for projects and good practices, not only linked with COVID, but more in general on aging well at home and what our members are doing in this area, with the deadline around the end of July, I think 20th of July. And the idea is to collect these kind of examples and produce a research briefing, but also feed in the Housing Evolutions Hub, which thanks for reminding everyone, Robin, it's a very important instrument where we can exchange, and it's also more interactive than the typical research products that we work at the observatory. So good point. So maybe if there is no other specific intervention or question from the audience, I would like to give the floor to Julien, because as you remember, the idea of this webinar was also to, so first of all, try to look at what our members are doing, but also always make the link with current and future policies at European level, and specifically opportunities for funding. So if Julien is there and available, thank you, Julien. If you can maybe say a few words about the potential role of cohesion policy and other funding opportunities at EU level. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Alice. I'd like to start with one of the things that has been said by our members today, is the need to reorient the discussion and the policy towards community living instead of pure institutional care. And I think this is a very important point, because this is the policy of the European Union since at least 2014 as regards to the funding provided by the EU. And if we take the example of the structural funds mentioned by Donald, I think, which covered European Regional Development Fund and European Social Fund, then indeed since 2014 it's not allowed anymore to finance institutions or strictly institutional care with ERDF or ESF. The idea of community living and community-based services is at the center of what is of the policy of the European Union in this field, and we have already examples from different countries, whether it's Portugal, where we have example of new construction for elderly people, but with the possibility to have a very openness with the let's say with the community. So new buildings, communal areas, dining rooms, things which will allow the residents to welcome their families. And this example from one tiny region in Portugal has been co-financed by the ERDF and has created quite a lot of jobs, because we are talking about new construction. We have also example from the European Social Fund, whose goal, generally speaking, is to provide human capital, skills and training for workers, for nurses or for social workers. So this training has been also used by, in that case, a region in Lithuania in order to provide for the necessary services which will accompany the provision of the, in a way, the building. So the combination of both ERDF and ESF is something which is already possible, and this is something that will continue in the future. In the next programming period, from starting in 2021, they are also the possibility and to use structural funds, whether it's ERDF or ESF, to provide for the necessary services. For instance, ERDF can provide for the building, which will be necessary to increase the integration of marginalized communities, migrants, and fragile groups. So this is something which is foreseen in the ERDF legislative text. For the European Social Fund, it's possible to use the Social Fund to provide training, skills, enhancement program in the view of increasing the access to quality and sustainable and affordable services, including the link between housing and people-centered care. So this is indeed the part of structural funds, so grants. We are talking about non-repayable grants, but we are talking about a program which require co-financing from the member states. So it will still be possible in the future, as I said, to provide support from the European Union in the field of grants, let's say cohesion policy. There's also another important task by the European Union, which is to provide guarantee for programs that supposed to be able to attract private finance. This is called InvestEU, and yes, InvestEU is a guarantee provided by the EU budget, which is supposed to help the creation of what we call investment platforms or any other program which will reinforce the provision of social, non-segregated and accessible rental housing. That's very important in the discussion what we have now, because the idea is really to feed and to promote the cooperation between the social housing sector and other non-for-profit, or in some cases for-profit entities that will be willing to invest in programs for elderly people. So that's also something that we have to bear in mind. And as Housing Europe is concerned, we work with other organizations at the moment to make sure that InvestEU will be a tool used for that purpose. So we want to make sure that good projects will be financed or will be supported by the EU guarantee, and indeed financed by other EU funding streams, whether it's structural funds or the EIB, the classical, in a way, the traditional EIB loans. And talking about the EIB, the European Investment Bank, they are providing loans for social and affordable housing only, so non-market housing. In particular, for activities in relation to independent living. This is one of the things that the European Investment Bank is doing, and besides the provision of social housing, the provision of refugee accommodation or student accommodation, care homes, assisted living facility, also something that the European Investment Bank is financing through loans, which require indeed part of the co-financing as well, usually 50% of the total cost of the program. So the European Investment Bank is also an option for our members to look at in the future, and they have this experience of working on those issues. What is clear is that the European Investment Bank, as well the European Commission, at least in their official policy, they want to promote the community living rather than institutional care. They want to promote new homes with more better accessibility, and this is something that we really continue to promote in the future. Now, I've been mentioning a lot about new buildings. Now the question remains about what to do with existing stock. I think Soka raised this question at the beginning. It's an important question because indeed the challenge will be for social housing operators to, when they do renovation of their stock, they will have to, in a way, do different things together at the same time, particularly when they do renovation, which is supposed to be a thermal renovation, energy renovation. They will have to think about whether there's a possibility to do accessibility works as well. Looking at the structural funds, so the ERDF, a lot of money will be available for the thermal renovation of homes, but it will also be important to reflect about the feasibility of having accessibility as one of the side effects, and this is something that we will also promote, and we have at Housing Europe different tools to promote the good practices from our members, whether it's the Housing Evolutions Hub, which is a new website, or our website in the traditional Housing Europe website. So both new construction and renovation will be possible, although it feels like the new construction will be a bit clearer and maybe easier, more straightforward. But we know the challenge lies in the renovation of the existing stock. So we'll probably require a bit of imagination from the project promoters to bring together different dimensions, whether it's thermal renovation, but also digital connectivity, because digital connectivity is one of the things which is possible to finance through the European structural funds. But of course, we need to combine it with other dimensions, including, as we said, independent living. So to summarize, we have the traditional EU budget, which can be used to support the different types of projects. So whether it's the ERDS, the European Regional Development Fund, the European Social Fund, and the use of the EU budget for InvestEU, which is for a guarantee to create an investment platform with private entities. And we have the EIB, the European Investment Bank, which traditionally supports social and affordable housing, but also care facility, student accommodation, and intergenerational accommodation in some cases as well. So we feel that there will be an important support from the EU on a lot of things related to social housing, particularly on independent living. And members will probably need a lot of guidance and also good practice, or even though a lot of things are going on the ground, but a lot of guidance and technical assistance to better access the funds in this field. So I think I will stop now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Julien. Is there any question or comment directly to Julien concerning cohesion policy and the type of opportunities that he mentioned? I don't see any questions. So if there are no questions specifically on this theme, maybe it's also worth mentioning that we, of course, also keep an eye on opportunities for European projects, European partnerships, and the theme of aging is one of the themes where a lot of innovation is needed indeed, and there are opportunities in this sense to put together and finance projects related to innovation in this area. Just to mention, the next Horizon Europe program has health as a key priority, as well as the idea of an inclusive society, and I'm sure that aging will be one of the key challenges figuring in the program. And last but not least, maybe also worth mentioning the ambient assisted living program, which is supporting the widespread of ICTs in the sector, currently has an open call until the end of August on healthy aging with the support of digital solutions. So maybe this is also something to keep in mind that we can look at as together to put together European partnerships. I think if there are no further questions or comments, we can probably close this session. It's been a very rich, very intense discussion. We heard a lot of good examples, and there is a lot of food for thought for the future, because aging is and will become even more so one of the key topics. So thank you all of you for participating, for sharing your experience and the current trends within your organization. Just as last reminder to please send us examples of good practices to feed into our work, as was mentioned before. And of course, the recordings and the presentations from today's webinar will be made available to all members shortly after today's webinar. So thank you very much. And I hope to see you soon in person
Alice?
as soon as possible.
Sorry, Alice?
Yeah.
Sorry, just to say we will stop now. We will stop now for the summer. So the next, we've been doing this every 2 weeks for the last period. So we will take a break now until the start of September, and we already are planning around the topic of the cost of the energy transition. And in fact, ADIS already have requested to give the Dutch perspective on that. So yes, so we take a break from that, but happy also to have additional suggestions on topics that might be useful for members to have this quick 90-minute exchange. Thanks.
So thank you.
Thanks.
And
thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye bye. Ciao ciao.
Bye.